Good afternoon. Welcome to this session on growth and diversity of Satcom. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to organizers for this session and giving me an opportunity to chair and moderate this session. And we have eminent speakers who are already well known in the industry. They need no introduction, special introduction. But as a customary, I'll just quickly run through a small introduction to all the panelists. Here, Mr. Girish Chandran, he is the Vice President and Chief Technical Officer at Viasat. In this role, he oversees the evaluation of Viasat's global network, which is responsible for connecting millions of personal and mobile devices per year on the ground, in the air and at sea. Welcome to you for this session. Another panelist is Dr. Roberti, Director Spectrum and Market Access, Telesat. Welcome to this panel, madam. And Mr. Deepak Mathur, Executive Vice President, Global Sales, Video, SES. He's an experienced satellite industry professional. Deepak is responsible for driving growth and strategy for the global video business of world-leading satellite operator SES. So welcome to you, sir, for this session. And next, Mr. Shivaji Chatterjee, Executive Vice President and Business Head, Enterprise and Government Businesses, Hughes Communication India Private Limited. He heads all the functions of Enterprise Business Unit, encompassing various areas of sales, marketing operations, field services, SCM, program management, and HR at Hughes. Mr. Vivek Prasad. Mr. Prasad has been involved in the space industry since 2010. He began consulting for NSR in 2019. So prior to his consulting work with NSR, he was leading the Frost & Sullivan Space Research Program as industry expert. So welcome to you for this session. So the session title is Growth and Diversity of Satcom. So we have been seeing the Satcom from the technology front as well as the application front. We are seeing a lot of advancements, and there is a lot of changes, which one side is demanded by the emerging applications, which altogether require a different service requirement, different capacities. On the other side, the traditional VSAT applications, they require more and more bandwidth to meet the customer services and the consumer expectations. And globally we see that consumer broadband is the one thing which is going to have a much wider demand from the satellite communications. So in this domain, we want to hear from the experts what is the currently what is happening and what is the future lookout for in this very vibrant area of satellite communication. Firstly, I would request Mr. Deepak Mathur to make it. Yeah, please.
get started. First of all, absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you very much, Mr. Rayappa, for the opportunity to spend a couple of minutes talking about some of the things that we're seeing. I was hoping we'd be able to demonstrate this because we start with, at least in India, what we started with was a geostationary satellite that essentially addressed all applications, which meant we were using a wide beam transponder in order to serve DTH, video applications. We were using it for distribution to cable systems. We were using it, thank you very much. Did it work? Right there. Thank you. This was exactly where I was going, so I will take a couple of minutes just to give a quick recap of where we are from an industry perspective. So traditionally, we tended to use GEO for all applications. And what we've now seen is the deployment and the development of new systems, which are NGSO, non-geostationary satellite systems. And with the NEO constellation, we have a much higher capability in terms of throughput, lower latency, and you have the ability to have global coverage with a constellation that's probably to the order of about $1 to $1.5 billion of an investment. It allows you to create a global network of these satellites, right? So you can cover essentially most of the globe with a NEO system that takes approximately $1.5 billion of investment. The next step that we've seen is in the NGSO systems, and of course, the size of the check that's going to come with these systems depends very much on the size of the constellations. We've seen filings that are going to 40 to 50,000 satellites, but essentially a global coverage system is probably in the range of 5 to 6 billion. So we've gone from a satellite, or 3 satellites that could cover the entire Earth, geostationary satellites with C-band, which would be typically to the order of about 250 million each, or 750 million to cover the globe. We've gone from there to NGSO systems in NEO that can do it at a significantly higher price point for a constellation, but can deliver much more throughput, and then on to LEOs, where again, at each incremental step, the ticket size or the investment that needs to be made is going up substantially, but the capability of the system is also going up substantially. So I think this is a really instructive slide because it tells us where the global market opportunity is, and I'm going to skip through so that I don't spend too much time on it. And it looks at the, on the bottom axis, you've got throughput per terminal, and as you go from left to right, you're going to higher throughput per terminal. And as you go from, on the y-axis, you're essentially going for greater flexibility, right? And the sweet spot of each of these applications depends on what satellite architecture you're using in order to address them. So let's take a moment and look at DVB broadcast. DVB broadcast is a medium throughput per terminal in the sense that you can push 90 to 100 megabits of throughput on a transponder, and it covers a very large area. So it's not very flexible, right? It can only essentially send the same content across the identical footprint. If you go toward the right, what you're looking at is far greater throughput from the constellation. So whether that is in the form of consumer broadband or in the form of providing connectivity to ships, to aero platforms, to ISR, the ability to take back from an ISR platform several hundred megabits of data, 700 gigabits of data going up from the plane back to a trunk allows you to be in a high flexibility because you can essentially point your beam anywhere on the surface of the Earth, combined with very high throughput per terminal. And so what we're starting to see is what used to be a one-size-fits-all geostationary satellite that served all applications with essentially the same architecture. You're starting to see new architectures serving better than others very, very specific applications. And what that means is that the size of the pie, the size of the global pie, from the revenues that we can start to see from each of these applications is growing because we can deliver far more effectively megabits for cellular trunking at a far more effective megabit, which increases the size of the market, as opposed to using traditional wide-beam geostationary satellites for that purpose. I think this is quite important to frame the discussion because it allows us to think about traditional satellites have been limited in the size of market because of the cost per bit delivered. By using new platforms, we have the ability to not only change and significantly lower the cost per megabit delivered, but also to massively increase the throughput. So a single beam on a MEO satellite like O3B can deliver well over 1 gigabit into a single spot beam, and by stacking you can get up to 10 gigabits onto a single spot. That's completely different capability, which means that the Indian Navy could actually follow in the blue oceans an aircraft carrier group and be able to actually get data back from that aircraft carrier group in real time and provide large bandwidth and connectivity to that mobile platform, but that would simply not have been possible with a geostationary satellite. So as we've started to change satellite architectures, it's opened new business cases, and I hope that that's kind of along the lines of the discussion that we're going to have going forward. I have lots more slides which were intended as part of a keynote tomorrow, so I'm going to save those. I thought this would be good as a framing in order to start talking about how we can discuss the market opportunities from here on. Thank you, Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Deepak. I request now Mr. Girish Chandran to make a small presentation.
Good afternoon, folks. And thank you for the invitation. And happy Diwali to all of you. So I just wanted to go over a few big picture concepts around GSO and GSO satellites for communications. And there's been various, I think in the various panels before this one, there have been different analysts providing estimates of growth of the space economy, and a big fraction of the space economy comes from satellite broadband. This is a Morgan Stanley report. This morning we had Euroconsult provide something like 45% of 600 million by 20. This should have been 2040, so we're really tight here. Anyway, just by way of introduction, Viasat was founded in 1986, based out of California. It has offices worldwide. We have several satellites that we've manufactured and launched. And this particular picture is the one that we're about to launch. It's you can see relatively what a big LEO satellite looks like with its, you can imagine the body structure, the payload there. That's sort of the size of a small little bus, and the wingspan of the solar panel is something like a 767 wingspan. So what does Viasat-3 provide? It does, we're going to launch 3 satellites over the next 12 to 18 months. And at a 6-month interval. And with that, we'll have global coverage. And the particular aspect of it is these are high-capacity satellites. There's a distinction which people often use high throughput versus high capacity, and I'll make the distinction later on. So these are multi-terabit, flexible, global broadband systems, much along the lines of Deepak's comments about MEO flexibility that they've created. And the other interesting feature is that the satellite gateways, sometimes called hubs, are getting smaller and smaller. And it just, you can see for reference some of the old satellite dishes and the new ones. These are gateway sizes, which are getting into small diameters, right? But if you look at, we look at what it means to, what is the capital efficiency of a satellite, and in order to do that, calculate that, you need to, look at how many gigabits are produced for what cost of capital, right? I think Deepak mentioned three numbers for geo systems and neo systems, and I think if you're looking at mega constellations, the numbers that were quoted were substantially larger than what Deepak said. I think the numbers that came out of Amazon was 10 billion, growing to potentially 50, they were willing to spend up to 15 billion. And then SpaceX started with 10 billion and went up to $30-ish billion, right? So these are significant investments. And these are very, SpaceX in particular is a mega constellation with tens of thousands of satellites. But this picture shows you a comparison of the cost, power, and capacity throughput delivered, right? So you can see the white picture, white line showing that now we're getting up to terabit for the same essential costs. So that's why we get substantially good economics from these kinds of satellites that we're making, Viasat is making. And now switching to LEOs, if you look at the number of filings, there's been a lot of interest in LEOs over the last several years. There is like close to 300,000 LEO satellite filings, some of which are in advanced publication, some of which in coordination requests, some of which are notified, etc. Right? So it tells you there's a lot of interest in putting up geo satellites. So this is the super simplified version of the economics of broadband, right? So you have ARPU is dollars per gigabit per month, and then CCPU, which is the cash cost per user. So the difference, that's also indexed in dollars per gigabyte per month. So if you look at what it takes to deliver, so what happens is all the investments that Deepak and I talked about get amortized across the entire subscriber base. And what drives, if you want lower cash cost per user in order to make profit, the difference between ARPU and CCPU is your profit, right? And so if you're trying to drive, if your ARPUs come down, CCPUs also have to come down. And the way to get CCPU down is looking at gigabytes, delivering more gigabytes per dollar per month. And the way you do that is by this Shannon's formula at the bottom, which says the capacity is directly proportional to the bandwidth, and it is proportional to the log of 1 plus the signal to noise ratio. That's what drives all communication, whether that's satellite communication, whether that's wireless communication, whether that's fiber communication. It's all driven by this single sort of equation. And it's very helpful to understand that. So if you look at the economics of LEOs and GEOs, if you just look at the cost side of things and focus on, suppose you had two systems with similar spectrum allocations, which means the B is the same, then you sort of look at how do you generate more capacity. So you have to drive up the power that's available on the ground. And what happens, in a satellite is basically, in a simplified way, it converts photons to electrons, from the solar panels to batteries, and the bus basically converts solar power into electrical power, and then that's converted into EIRP, or the power, with the antenna there, it converts to power flux density, and power flux density is then packaged and sold, right? That's what is used to deliver bits. That's what closest links. So if you take a satellite at GEO and drop it to LEO orbits, you'll see that in order to cover the same area on the ground, you need smaller antennas, but the gain of the antennas then becomes smaller, and so you have the spreading loss from the GEO to LEO compensated exactly by the loss in gain at the LEO orbit. So power flux density essentially becomes the same. So if you look at, but if you're in the business of making money, somebody has to buy your product. And if you're looking at who's going to buy your product, you need to look at where the distribution of people are. And this picture shows you the world population density. Okay, so you can see, the blue ones represent more than 500 per square kilometers, 500 people, and the gray ones in Siberia and northern parts of Canada and Sahara Desert is all less than a few people per square kilometer, right? And you can see India is in the between 100 to 500-ish numbers and pockets of 500 per square kilometer. So that's sort of but here's an example of what happens when you put mega constellations up. This is a picture of a multi-10,000 LEO constellation overlaid on a hot heat map of population. So look at how many satellites are over populated areas. Right, 70% of the Earth is water. So there is a lot of unused satellite capacity that someone has to pay for, right? So I would invite you to look up at these lights and imagine that they're LEO satellites and they're radiating light onto each table, right? You have all these, think of all these as satellites, and if the room were empty, if all of the meeting was over, and the lights were still on, it would be total waste of power and total waste of capacity. So there's economics of broadband is really suggests when you have these very large constellations is really 5% of utilization. The satellites are used effective use of the satellite is 5%. So if you look at so this is a Morgan Stanley report which suggests that you can generate, so on the left side is a mega constellation with $20 billion investments and 12,000 satellites. That's cost per gigabits month is in the range of $10,000 to $20,000. And you can see, you can construct geo satellites which are, Viasat 1, Viasat 2, Viasat 3 and 4, showing how you can drive down by intelligently using beams and flexibility in locating beams and overpopulation areas. The other reason for the lower LEO productivity is the short life of each satellite. Now you can make LEOs like Iridium does, where you're paying a lot more for a satellite and they have longer lifespans. And then the 5% effective thing I mentioned. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do LEOs. That's not the message. so for example, Viasat builds, is building a payload for military applications with the Link 16 network for beyond line of sight type applications. So there is, right, so I think multi-orbit type things, which Deepak is talking about, where you're combining GEOs and LEOs or MEOs, it's possible you can create sustainable LEOs with are possible with the right economics if you're designing the constellations correctly. So I just wanted to leave it there and go to the panel here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sorry, Mr. Chandran. And now may I request Dr. Laura to present.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and I wish to express my gratitude to SIA for this opportunity and also to the chair of this session, of course. I've not prepared any presentation, so I'll just improvise and say thank you. Say a few of the things that I have in mind. I'm a regulatory person, so the little expertise I have is restricted to this field. And in the field I work on, which again is the regulatory field, I see a lot of controversy, a lot of confrontation between the different systems. And by different systems, I mean satellite versus terrestrial, or GSO versus non-GSO. And it is my wishful thinking, it is my wish that I would see less. And why? Because I think we can all, maybe I'm naive, but I genuinely think that we can all coexist in a synergetic manner that really provides choice and the best service possible depending on specific needs. Always speaking strictly from a regulatory standpoint, I'm also of the conviction that regulations should not be used, or in any case should not be geared towards impairing technical development, but rather to facilitate it. Once again, to increase the choice in a sustainable manner, of course, for the ultimate benefit of the customer. Non-GSO systems have been contemplated in the radio regulations for many years now in several frequency bands, including provision for protection of other services and systems. There are some outstanding issues, of course. For instance, there are a couple of open agenda items for the next World Radio Conference that will be in Dubai next year. Like for other early agenda items, studies are undergoing, and I'm confident that a solution will be found. So coming back to what I mentioned at the start, I really believe in a synergetic approach to the different systems that are involved. Non-geostationary systems have a different type of design that has some peculiar characteristics, which makes them suitable for some applications and maybe not so much for others. If I may say, I respectfully disagree with the statement that was made before that in terms of design there would be a lot of inefficiency in terms of poor use, because the same could be said of geostationary systems, where a lot of the beams that cover the ocean are not used as much as the beams covering where populations are. So I'm just trying to highlight what some of the different characteristics are. In terms of, for instance, of orbital characteristics, there is possibly, of course, more flexibility when it comes to non-geostationary systems. If I'm thinking now at the system that Telesat is designing, is using, for instance, two different types of orbits. One is a polar orbit, which allows for truly global coverage, including in the poles, where some, for instance, of the airline are flying now also to save fuel. While the other type of orbit is so-called, what's the name? Not equatorial, but is around more around the equator, and so it allows to concentrate the capacity again where the majority of the need is, in the more populated areas. But again, satellite systems in general are more of, if I may use the word, more of a niche market in the sense that they are intended to provide services where terrestrial services cannot reach, or at least not in a economically or even practically viable manner. And this is, of course, the oceans, for instance, that's a perfectly good example, or also the areas of the Earth that are more difficult to reach, where are more remote, mountainous, and so on. But again, in this, I think there is enormous societal value that is, as a whole, as a satellite industry, we can bring. And if anything, COVID has shown exactly that, how important, how essential connectivity is for the entire population to benefit from what there is to offer in terms of education. But I'm sure you've heard this many, many times. But the fact is that a large part of the population still has not a sufficiently good enough quality of connectivity. And this is where a satellite can really bring enormous value. But just to highlight some again, and then I'll conclude, of the different characteristics that a non-GSO can bring. I've already mentioned the truly global coverage, for instance, and there are others. For instance, also in terms of security of the network. Some of the non-GSO, I'm not speaking again specifically about the Telesat design, but a non-geostationary network allows, for instance, for inter-satellite optical links. So basically, this creates a mesh in the sky, which one becomes much more secure because there is no single point of failure anywhere, and also very flexible in the sense that when regulations allow, of course, you can redirect the data throughout the network in an optimized manner. For instance, if, I don't know, an Earth station in that moment is impaired by weather conditions, so just to make an example. The fact that there is a selection of satellites in the sky allows, for instance, in general, to avoid the issue of low elevation angle at the edges of the coverage area, and that's another characteristic, for instance, that also helps when it comes to interference to terrestrial systems if the elevation angle of the satellite terminal is high. There are other, in general, because again, LEO systems or non-geostationary systems are new, they tend to take advantage from the latest technological developments. For instance, if I'm thinking now of the Telesat systems, they, rather than using fixed beam patterns, there is what is called hopping beams. So basically, the totally regenerative payload creates small beams. They can hop over the coverage area of each single satellite at a rate that is fast enough for each user in the coverage area, basically not to see it, to get the service that is required. And I would stop here really. But again, the main message that I would like to convey is a message of coexistence, optimized across the different systems and the services. And with this, I thank you all very much. Also thanks also to the other panelists for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laura Roberti. May I now request Mr. Shivaji Chatterjee to present his views. Thank you, and welcome everyone. If after that nice lunch we wanted to break out of that slumber, this MEO versus GEO versus LEO, which happened, it's great to see. I think 3 of the big operators around the world, SES has diversified into MEO and now into its second generation of MEO. You have Telesat, one of the biggest geo operators now, directly I think jumping into a second generation of LEO when it launches. And of course Viasat as a geo operator doubling down into probably its, I don't know, third generation of geo satellites. So it really, there was a typification of this theme of diversity, then it's very much there. You have the diversity, in this panel itself. So just couple of slides on Hughes, and I think when we look at growth and diversity, which are the two themes in Satcom, I think Hughes as a company pretty much exemplifies both these attributes. We've completed 50 years in the satellite business last year. In India, we've completed 27 years. The GVF, announced Hughes in its 25 years as the company which has been most pioneering in innovation just last month in the Euroconsult show in Paris. And I think I won't get into all these numbers, but I think all these numbers are diverse in itself, from the size, from the history and legacy which is there, from the global scale, the different kind of networks that we power, and of course the role has been end-to-end, not just as an inventor and OEM, but also to really provide end-user service to maintaining the site on the ground anywhere, in the world. So I think that's really the end-to-end service, and that's what has kept us in this business. I think it's understanding the consumer and also understanding the business case. What is very much true, and last 2 weeks back there was an event, one of the space congress. This is another space congress. I think in another 2 months there's another event. So suddenly, from no events in this space in the country, suddenly you have so many events and hype happening. So, I even wonder that I've been in Hughes India for 25 years, that what's happened, what's changed. Suddenly a lot of people calling in and say we want satellite broadband. So that's not really the case. Definitely there is, global scale, global projects which are bringing the excitement. But I think to get the end business case is a different challenge, and I'll come to that. But Hughes India, we, as I said, started in '95. We've been profitable. We created a joint venture with Airtel earlier this year, and we have a 69% market share in the Viasat business in India. As with any company which has started off in the mid-90s, you acquire customers in the urban areas first, and we've diversified beyond Satcom. We are doing the biggest, say, pure non-Satcom SD-WAN project in the country, and we have multiple lines of business. Even in the, to keep up with the latest in Satcom, we started the first national HTS network in the country for broadband, and we also have taken up the exclusive distributorship of OneWeb LEO capacity in India, which should go live within a year or so. So there's definitely a big play, and we believe in the Indian demand. And I've broken my presentation into two parts: growth and then diversity. In terms of growth, firstly, let's look at where we are and where Satcom has had a play in India. One of the things we've really innovated is, being very cost effective, being able to provide service at a very, very low cost. So at just about 1,000 to 1,200 rupees a month to provide an end-to-end service with equipment, 24/7 support, and bandwidth to, say, an off-site ATM. And that's why 90% of the off-site ATMs in India are running on Viasat. So that's one kind. It's similar for lottery, point of sale, any very low bandwidth application. We're able to innovate and bring the costs really effective. The other big driver all these years has been branch connectivity, both for primary and backup, because now all applications are centralized, and whatever you say about a wire in India, it tends to get cut. The rains come for 3 to 4 months,
and there are many challenges, and all mission critical networks do need that backup. The other important thing is bridging the divide. I think we are blessed as a satellite industry that by default we do a social cause like bridging the digital divide, because that's where satellite reaches and no one else reaches, and we don't just reach, we reach with the same quality of service that we provide in an urban site, and that is very unique. You will never get a wired connection, or I would say even a cellular service which will be of the same level in a rural site. Either the BTS is far away or the wireline has a longer run, but for satellite it's truly homogeneous quality of service. The other important area which has opened up in the last 3 years is mobility. It's a very exciting area. It's something which is uniquely done on satellite, in the air, in the water, and now land mobility got permitted earlier this year. That's a big area of growth. I think this is still developing. And of course, I think a lot of the government and defense users, nearly every arm of the armed forces are using satellite very strategically. National security is a very important thing. Complete control end to end is truly there with a satellite captive network, and of course many other wings of the government also use it very actively. The digital divide is again, it's a big theme globally. You see so many countries have national broadband programs. We had BharatNet, we have the National Broadband Mission. The ITU initiative itself for 2030 is to really ensure that the divide and as many broadband programs every 2 years there's a state of the broadband report, and it really shows the advancement of connecting the unconnected which is there, and it opens up many. It's not just about connecting the gram panchayat or the village, it's about providing the last mile services on 4G or 5G, on Wi-Fi, on providing fiber to the home even with a satellite backbone, providing applications like school connectivity. Today over 70% of schools in India don't have internet, and as you know that's a fundamental element to learn. It's government to citizen services, and of course health. So I think these very core pillars are still there. A lot has to be done to unlock it. And one of the things which maybe we'll discuss it in the panel is the government, while it has so many clear paths, we heard the secretary say, we don't have a national satellite broadband program. Even the 4G connectivity to the unconnected villages in India allows for satellite in 5% of the sites for only 2 years. Now, are we saying that every site in India is going to get fiber after those 2 years? If the answer is no, then the program is flawed. Secondly, there's no satellites like many other, for a large country, if we say we want to provide 100 meg or 1 gigabit to every village, then there should be a satellite program empowering somebody like NSIL or ISRO to build a satellite for the country, or a VHTS satellite, or a NGSO capacity, whichever way. But I think that is very important that the government policy really supports this, because the business case never will. Whatever Deepak you've said, in India, it's 10 rupees per GB which the mobile subscriber sends, right? Now, no business case for satellite, irrespective of all the enhancements, will ever fit in 10 rupees per GB. So, a commercial operator would never deploy satellite for the purpose of reaching the, unless there's a subsidy, or unless it really has to for a rollout obligation, which we don't have any rollout obligation also in India. We have only spectrum auctions without any rollout obligation. So I think these are some things to ponder. If you're going to look at growth, and if you're going to look at Viasat 3 and Telesat Lightspeed and O3b mPower, OneWeb being used in India, it's going to be very tough to be used in capacities of hundreds of gigabits or terabits unless there's a business case. The commercial business case to get to this level will only come when it's broadband in the underserved areas, but that needs a government subsidy, or it needs cellular services to increase their price 50 times and then it becomes cost effective. So I think that's a very important element of growth. definitely there are multiple ways to reach the rural consumer, and I think there are programs around each one. There's BharatNet for the backhaul, there's broadband to the roof, like what Viasat does or Hughes does in the US, or Starlink has started to do in different parts of the world. And of course, there's the backhaul for the mobile operators to go in and provide 4G services. Some of the key government projects, and I mentioned this earlier, but these are the programs which exist today, and this is where I feel the policy needs to come in, where the government does something definitive for Satcom. Otherwise, all these projects are not able to meet their deadlines, and the satellite's capacity is there, the will is there, but I think the two need to come together, and I think that really requires that policy to open, whether it's for education, health, for the Northeast, which is an underdeveloped part of the country and a tough terrain, or for the broadband mission. So this is really, I think, fundamental to grow. The private enterprise needs for connectivity are far limited compared to how the government needs Satcom. But no doubt, these are definitely two elements of the business. We've come so far. We've hit 300,000 Viasats in India, but for the last 3 years, that number has not changed. We kept growing. If you see, it was like a hockey stick. We reached 300,000, but for the last 3 years, we are between 285 and 300,000 as an industry, which means terrestrial is caught up, you're churning, whatever you're adding is also not sufficient. And that's where you need the growth areas. Definitely with HTS services, which say we've launched, we were able to sell 1 gigabit capacity in, on the ISRO HTS satellites for cellular backhaul in the last year. Across the 27 years before that, we didn't sell 1 gigabit cumulatively. So definitely supply helps create demand, but that demand also has to be stimulated in a sustainable way. There are many such areas, the mobility itself where satellite is king. There's a big need for it, and the business cases are getting better and better. I'll now come to the diversity, and I won't try and repeat, the debate, because I don't want to be the fourth in line. But, definitely, what has made it hot, what has made so many Satcom events, it's a changing industry. The number of satellites going up every year is immense, and definitely it's created a whole ecosystem around for ground segment, for alliances, for launches, for operations, for capacity. So the supply is great, and the technology innovation which is coming, and the different type of people who have come in from outside the industry bringing engineering knowledge is great to see. At a very basic level, what has made the difference? Deepak mentioned satellites were made for video, and in the morning he made a very beautiful reference about how the multiplier effect of a broadcast video creates economies. I think for data, it's the other way. It's not broadcast, it's the unicast, because each one requires unique data, and it is this multi-spot beam, which is what made cellular technology viable, the frequency reuse, that is changing the satellite technology. And we launched our service over the last year in different parts of the country, and it's made a big difference. We've been selling kbps all these years. It feels good to be able to sell a multi-megabit service, to give a proposal for a customer who needs higher bandwidth without them hitting the roof, saying it's 20 times more than their budget. So it's become viable to some extent. Of course, with more supply, it's going to get better and better. And what HTS construct, which started off with a GEO with spot beam, is really translated into VHTS satellites like Jupiter 3, like Viasat 3, which are really taking that to, I think 500 gigabits, 1 terabits. I think capacities which are unthinkable on a single satellite. And of course, with non-GSO bringing multi-gigabit satellites in hundreds of gigabits and multiplying it by 100 or thousands based on the constellation. So definitely very exciting times. And the capex is also huge, which is coming, but that's part of the big game which is being played. It's, these are players who are well funded of a global scale, I think most of these are coming to fruition. You have Starlink, which is live, OneWeb, which will be live. It's live already beyond 50° north, but will be live globally within 9 months. And you have, of course, Telesat here, which is, I think, majority funded. And of course, Amazon with the Project Kuiper. So, very, very exciting times. And our view really is that, one of coexistence. It's too early to say how the technology evolves. We've just seen that even LEO, which the business case was very tough, as shown earlier, is innovating all the time and generating new cases, and the whole vertical integration is making lot of things very possible. So I'll say that it's a fantastic time for different technologies to coexist and provide its strength. This is my last slide. And just as a summary, we believe in this multi-transport, multi-orbit vision. We really, as a service provider in India, are very happy for these things to happen. And global constellations, because they're global, they're not skipping India, but they're going to be available in India. So it's a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shivaji. May I now request Mr. Vivek to make his views on the subject.
Yeah, I've closed it. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Vivek. I am a senior analyst with Northern Sky Research. We are 20 plus years old satellite industry market consulting and research company. So there are various points which have been discussed. So I'll be discussing by use cases what has been the global trends and where is India positioned across all of those use cases. So at the outset, we are witnessing mixed trends across different use cases, starting with video market. The market obviously contributes to majority of the Satcom revenue pie at the moment, but the market is declining. It is declining because of price erosion. It is declining because of competition from OTT platforms and other reasons. Looking at the second use case, that is broadband access, clearly it is a massive opportunity market. At the global level, if we see around 50% of the global population are still unconnected or underconnected. Looking at India, approximately 1.4 billion population, 67% of that are located in the rural regions, and only 27% of that is connected. So clearly a massive opportunity in the broadband access market, but it is also true that this market is extremely price sensitive, and the current capacity of service pricing is not in alignment with the existing demand. So what do we expect moving forward is, as we all said, that massive capacity influx both in GEO and LEO. We estimate around by 2030 around 24.5 Tbps in GEO, and non-GEO technical capacity, obviously a lot of capacity gets wasted over ocean. Around 380 Tbps capacity will be added in orbit by 2031. So obviously these massive capacities will translate into steep price erosion, and according to our estimates, the prices are going to reach, especially for applications such as consumer broadband, approximately around $50 to $80 per Mbps per month. Already in terms of service pricing, we have seen that Starlink has reduced its monthly subscription prices across many countries in Latin America and Europe region. The key frequency bands which are going to grow this market, because they offer better price economics, are going to be GEO-STS, Ka-band and non-GEO-STS frequency bands. The next use case is social inclusion. Post-COVID-19, this segment has been growing very rapidly, and the demand has ramped up very fast across different regions, because the demand for connecting schools, libraries, e-governance, hospitals, etc. Have added multiple number of sites, and even per site demand is also increasing. Some of the key programs which is driving this growth in the region, Asia region, are Bhakti, program in Indonesia, BharatNet. Hughes has connected, I believe, more than 5,000 sites under this program. Bridging Digital Divide program in Philippines, NBN's effort in Australia. So these are some of the programs, and similar programs are going to drive the social inclusion market moving forward. The next segment is backhaul and trunking. We have noted that in a region, every time the network is upgraded from 2G to 3G to 3G to 4G to 5G, we see a step change in the capacity demand, and that is obvious. So India is going to be a key market, as we know that 5G spectrum allocation has happened, so capacity demand will be on the higher side moving forward. We expect multiple collaborations as well between telco, VSAT player, and different satellite operators in the region. Talking about the mobility market was one of the most hit market during COVID, and currently we see that globally it is on a rebound curve, and in the region, ease regulation in in-flight connectivity in India and China are going to increment the satellite bandwidth demand in the region moving forward. The last segment is enterprise VSAT market. This segment covers a wide range of end users, starting from retail segment, hospitality applications, then banking use cases, energy markets, and other enterprises. So the trend what we see at the moment is companies are investing in digital transformation and process automation technologies, especially after COVID-19. And the key technologies where they are investing, which we expect will increase ARPUs, will increase demand moving forward, are cloud, edge computing, private LTE, and SD-WAN. Overall, if we look globally, we expect moderate growth in the enterprise VSAT segment. But in the last few years, we did note that within India, retail and banking segment had more deployments for the VSAT terminals. So talking from the Indian market perspective, clearly a lot is changing, and every satellite operator, service provider, equipment suppliers are looking forward to the Indian market in order to capture a good amount of market share, because obviously the addressable market for the country is really massive. And as a result, we have seen multiple partnerships as well. That could be Hughes, OneWeb, or Airtel plus OneWeb, Telesat with Nelco, and recently Thycom with NXT Digital and all. The major use cases which we see, which will drive the market within the region and within India, are going to be, especially for the near term, are going to be social inclusion segment, backhaul segment, and enterprise VSAT segment. Clearly, the discussion cannot be over until we talk GEO versus LEO. So obviously, there are two schools of thoughts as the panelists presented. One thought is we cannot ignore non-GEO and go multi-orbit strategy. Clearly, SES had been the first mover with O3B mPOWER, and then we have Telesat, then recently Eutelsat and OneWeb. Whereas the other school of thought is non-GEO player, they do not close the business case. So it's going to be a wait and watch moving forward, since because a lot of capacity is wasted over ocean, and you need to replenish your satellite within a shorter period of time. That adds to recurring cost. So overall, what is NSR stance, non-GEO versus GEO? Clearly, globally, with the price erosion, the total opportunity sphere is increasing, and the total market is growing. So we expect that non-GEO market share only within the HTS segment, it was around 10% in 2021, and it is expected to grow close to 33.7% by 2031. Overall, we expect that GEO HTS will maintain the leadership position in the ongoing decade. However, from lower base value, non-GEO HTS will also grow at a faster pace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vivek. Now we will just have a couple of questions for each panelist. I'll ask my questions, and we are left with 15 more minutes. So possibly then we will go to the audience for their questions. Now I'll go from my right to left. So to Mr. Shivaji, Hughes has been a leading Viasat service provider in India. We all know that. But they have been the service provider on these days. So my question is, you have the wide experience of providing connectivity to all sectors of business, be it enterprise or banking or other things, and you remained as a service provider. But what is your view whether it is advantage to be continue as a service provider, or do you feel an advantage? You said the cost sensitivity of the Indian consumers, whether it will make any sense if you one becomes a total end-to-end service provider, like operating a satellite, owning a separate, having ground systems, everything. What is your view on it?
Well, there are two takes to it. Definitely there are certain places where the ownership economics, like consumer internet, unless you have the end-to-end cost control, you can't close the business case. So in the US, Hughes, and even in Latin America, for consumer internet, Hughes is an end-to-end provider where we own satellites, launch satellites, operate satellites, and do the service too. So that's, one thing. But definitely there is a benefit I see as a service provider. You can't be an end-to-end service provider across all technologies. So purely from Hughes India perspective, I think it's best to take all this. Whenever supply is so high, the prices will come down and we'll be able to provide value to the end user. So I'll say we will always keep our options open, whether it's OneWeb, whether it's some other LEO or MEO option. I think we are definitely open for all options. Whatever gives the best value, I think the end user cases are going to get good with such supply, and the prices are going to fall down.
Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Girish Chandran. We see that now there is a lot of NGSO systems coming into operation, and there are new announcements as well. Over time, maybe after 10 years or so, what will be the kind of challenge? Will there be any space or opportunities open for the new players, or do you see that it will be captured by only a few players?
I think it's a tricky question. It's multifaceted. So if you look at infrastructure, so there is this, GEOs have had orbital allocations, slot allocations. And what is happening with the NGSOs is that there are orbital planes, or orbital arcs, basically, orbital shells, and there are planes within each orbit. And if you have large mega constellations chewing up entire orbital shells, then the LEO space gets pretty crowded, leaving very little room for new entrants to come in. That's one point. Second thing is this point that both Shivaji and Vivek made. There is a fair amount of ongoing investments to keep launching new satellites and deorbiting satellites that are coming down. So there's a significant ongoing financial commitment to it. And so the appetite for that, you have to have sufficient amount of capital to keep going in that business. So there is a threshold to entry in that, right? And so those are the 2 points I would like to make.
Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Deepak. We have seen a trend that the video business globally is going to flatten in the immediate future, and there is an expectation that it may slowly come down. And what would be the most killer application which we feel that it will take over the gap created by the video market?
So I think what's interesting is that all the increase in data that we're seeing on what we're calling network data, right? IP bits, 90% of it is actually video. And it's very inefficiently delivered video. We've done some high-level, approximations about what it would cost to deliver 2 HD channels to each home in India, which they can get from a linear solution. And it's 200 times based on the cost of a CDN, a content delivery network, that you would need to get. It's 200x to deliver it. So I'm convinced that in a ARPU-sensitive market like India, and quite frankly everywhere in the world, the synergy will exist between linear distribution and non-linear for on-demand content. But the economics and the amount of power that is consumed for delivering, if you think about it, we're watching a cricket game, right? I'm hoping everyone watched the India-Pakistan game. It was an absolute nail-biter. So if you watch that game, you're sitting next to me, and a unique stream with all of the power that takes up is being delivered to you with its CDN cost. And I'm sitting physically next to you, and identical infrastructure, identical cost is for delivery to me. And I think the unicast nature of the internet is a fundamental problem that has to be cracked if we're going to get efficient at delivering video in an IP environment. So for me, the answer is that video will go through a transition where today it is DVD, but over time, I'm absolutely convinced that it is going to be an IP network where the device becomes entirely independent. You can watch the same video stream on your large television, connected TV, on your handset, on your iPad, and the manner in which that's delivered can still use linear satellite, for example. So I'm much more optimistic. I do agree that we've reached a plateau, but that plateau comes because we need to come up with new standards, DVD-IP as an example, in order to make sure that we can take the next level of transition where we move from a purely DVD delivered world to an IP. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too lengthy an answer.
Explained very nicely. Thank you for that. And my question to Dr. Laura Roberti is, you're a spectrum expert now. We are Ka band was the most optimistic band for the broadband applications. The way the things are unfolding in a short near future, I think there will be too many satellites operating in the K band and leaving a little scope to expand. So obvious choice is to go to the next band. What is your view on adopting, and whether in terms of new bands and any aspects in adopting the new band?
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, things will continue to evolve. K-band was the new band a few years ago, but it's no more. Now it's almost the de facto band for high broadband deployment. And this is very much also due to the support of technological development, because we all know that in K-band there were some propagation challenges that have now been overcome by several technologies like spread spectrum, power control, adaptive coding, modulation, and so on. And this progress is not stopped here, it's continuing, and it progress also to other frequency bands. So now there are all, again, at the regulatory level, there are other bands that have been discussed, the Q bands, the 40, 50 gigahertz, and these for the time being are mainly for application related to gateway deployment. But for instance, I can see, personally, I can see applications such as in-flight connectivity, for instance, that may be suitable even at these higher frequency bands, because again, the aircraft is above generally, so the majority of its trajectory is above the cloud and hence is above the weather. So I'm not sure I'm answering to your question, but yes, I promise we've gone, and with that, the utilization of higher frequency bands to a certain need, of course, because not even the technology can defy physics, but we are not at the end of the road yet. If I answered your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. To my questions to Mr. Vivek is, now it comes to the user mentality of the service cost and all those things. Always there's a feeling that India is a cost-sensitive market. Now we are opening up space sector for, of course, opened up space sector for larger participation of private and all those things. In the reformed environment, how do you see India?
Yes, sure. From end user perspective, again, it depends on the use case, right? So let's say consumer broadband. The existing prices, service penetration is clearly not possible. But there are innovative solutions. We can learn from the developments which have happened in Mexico or other countries in Latin America, where the service deployment need is also price sensitive. So there even Hughes has around 3,600 Wi-Fi hotspots. So that is a shared network. So this allows the user to use the satellite broadband network, again sharing it with other devices and other layers, and this drastically reduces the cost to the end users. So there's a possibility that you can deploy service in that fashion. Looking at enterprise VSAT market, again, we see that the requirements are changing from, as it was mentioned by different panelists, is changing from kbps level to mbps level. And we expect the similar trend to continue. And obviously supply is going to be one of the key factors in order to unlock majority of the demand, especially in India.
Thank you. Thank all the panelists for their presentations and clarifying the questions posed by me. Now I open to the questions from the audience. Please help us to provide the mic. Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
I'm Riaz Lamak from the Global Visa Forum. Since morning, otherwise, we have been hearing about the way Indian Satcom and space industry has evolved, and now it's on a threshold of opening up. DOS and DOT has been announcing and inviting suggestions. On the other hand, we have seen how the technology has moved, and right from the bands to GEO, MEO, and LEO, and the applications. So to each of the panelists, one wish which you expect the government to note, and which will help in quick monetization of the entry into India in the space and Satcom segment, and have interest in India.
Thank you. Any other suggestions or questions? Well, two wishes. One is open it up so that all the supply comes. I think there's talk of this, space policy for long. That needs to come, and let as much supply come. That will help create the demand. And second is for government to have a Satcom usage policy for all its programs. The Telecom Secretary talked about so many missions of the government. So I'll say these are the two wishes.
I would concur. I would, instead of picking winners in a market, policy changes, instead of carving out spectrum for this particular technology or that particular technology, that's, basically if you look at Shannon's theorem, capacity is driven by how much bandwidth you have. And if you want to drive costs down, you want more bandwidth. And satellites are quite capable of delivering low cost bandwidth if the policies were more expansive.
I mean, yeah, please. Thanks. Riaz, from my perspective, we've been in India for a long time. We will be here for a long time. I think the Satcom policy anticipates our becoming an Indian company, right? And that is something that we've wanted to do for a long time, and to be present on the ground and be able to deliver sort of a lot of the technological work that's happening that can be leveraged, exactly to the point that Shivaji made, which is, bandwidth is available, bring it to market, and let the market figure out what the most appropriate technology, what the most appropriate solution is. So that's one. And I'm talking a little bit out of my depth here because I'm not the right guy, and Shivaji and others are much more so. I think the complexity of deployment of a single system, particularly when you start thinking about how consumer broadband is going to get deployed, is way too complex. It essentially means that we can't contemplate a consumer broadband type setup, no matter what the cost is, in India, given the current manner in which we authorize transmission from remotes. So that's something I think that probably needs to be thought of as well. And sort of finally, sorry, I have 3 wishes, why not? Since you're giving 2, I'll take 3. So I would say, really, the third is somewhat to the point that, we need to open up bands quite widely to make sure that BSS is used for video applications, right? FSS is used for two-way where it needs to be. Ka band is used in its appropriate place. I think we've shoehorned or forced applications into certain areas because of the history of the regulations, and perhaps we need to open that up to a point where the appropriate technology gets used for the appropriate application.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a very, I believe it's a very good question. I think starting in the last 2-3 years, the various governmental entities in India have undergone what I would describe as a massive process of revision of existing domestic regulations, and which is still ongoing now. It's an open process, which I think is great. And my wishful thinking in this respect is for a streamlined regulatory framework as an outcome of all this entire process that allows for, again, market access, also in terms of coexistence of all systems based also on best international practice. And I have all confidence that this process is actually leading in this direction. Thank you once again.
Yeah, so yes, it is a positive move that we expect the policies to evolve, but the key challenge moving forward is going to be on the implementation side. So the focus from different departments and government has to be on the implementation side. All the questions regarding entering into different business, leasing capacity, targeting different market has to be there at one place, so that a player who wants to enter into the market does not have to run pillar to post, like how different questions can be answered. So there should be a unified portal which should enable implementation of different parts of the policies, which we are expecting to change in a positive direction.
No, as per many views expressed by many of the speakers here, you must have seen that Government of India has already taken initiative to bring out a space policy which addresses most of the aspirations. And DOT has also, DOT Secretary himself told in the morning that there are a lot of new guidelines which will look towards the progress of this sector. So new guidelines will facilitate it. So any other question from any members, please? Yeah.
My question to the panel is, with the race for satellite technology now heating up and all the buzz that has been created in India market, which 2 changes objectively do you see, is a major game changer now? With, the conventional satellite which has been there, and now now with HTS, LEO and everything coming up, which do you think is the major game changer for the next 1 or 2 years which is going to come up?
More capacity, lower cost. Maybe I'd like to add to his thing. The lower capacity, of course, he has told the aspiration of that, but lower capacity comes by adapting the advanced technologies like frequency reuse, spot beams, high power, higher frequency, the lesser terminal cost, lesser and efficient terminal cost. These are all the different considerations. But if we look towards that, all the HTS systems which are coming to operations this thing. Of course, as Deepak was telling, you cannot just like come out of the traditional, the wider coverage satellites. They have their own advantages. So for example, a smart network which has to be covered entire nation, though the spectrum cost comes out in the HTS platform, if you look at the implementation cost, the wider coverage satellites will have the overall economic advantage and operations advantage.
For me, what's really exciting is actually not a technology, which I think is where you were going. You were saying what technology is going to be the most interesting. I think what's really exciting is the change in the way regulators are talking. They're trying to kickstart a startup ecosystem. I think they recognize the need to bring in the best, irrespective of the fact that it's made, is it invented in India, or is it the most appropriate technology that can expand utilization, that can ensure that we have e-government initiatives, that we bridge the digital divide. And I think that shift is so important. The session we had this morning could not have happened 2 years ago. It would not have happened 2 years ago, even 2 years ago. So for me, I think that change of thinking, of opening up is probably the single most important thing, and now following through with the new policies.
Evening. My question is to all the satellite providers here. Other than broadband in India, what are your approach towards satellite IoT within the Indian market?
As a satellite operator, SES is not really engaged in the IoT space. I think it's likely to be much more coming up from the startup area, where we're starting to see companies that are innovating specifically in that area, really narrowband systems. As a global satellite operator, we aren't spending a lot of time and effort on this anywhere in the world, and certainly not in India at the moment.
Thank you. Yes, IoT is a very general term that encompasses possibly many applications. If you're specifically referring to millions of devices connected to the network at very low bit rate, this is more of a narrowband application, so that is not our specific field. But for instance, I would envisage that under the term IoT, you could also consider applications such as the automated car or automated vessels or aircraft, in these cases for telecom and control of these vehicles, and also for instance for download of software to an automated car. These are high bandwidth applications in which also systems such as SES, Viasat, Hughes and Telesat can definitely contribute. And for these, as our colleague mentioned before, you need higher capacity at a lower cost. Thank you.
Yeah, I would add that we have a business called NSS business, where we have the ability to monitor oil pipelines and oil rigs and drilling, and both upstream of upstream in the drilling process, in the transport process, in the refinery process, all IoT devices. We have the ability to monitor water levels and so on and so forth. But generally the issue again comes back to two things, you know, the device. If you're trying to look at agriculture or we're looking at all those things, but we have a business in some of these other things I mentioned. But if you're looking at widely deployed low power devices, then it becomes a challenge from a satellite perspective, because I think there's battery life, you know, how do you close the link at these very, very low power, low battery kind of things that are last for a very, very long time. So there are ecosystem challenges and then business model challenges as well, because a lot of the IoT business, there is some in connectivity, but there's, you know, money in the data side of the business as well. So we monitor, for example, you know, one of our businesses actually monitors data from rental cars and so on and so forth. So for providing automotive feedback. So anyway, we're kind of out of time here.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have exceeded the 10 minutes more than what is allotted to us. So it was an interesting discussion. Thank you, everyone. I think over to the organizers.